Pay attention to the man in the third row, 7 seats from the aisle. He's dressed in a dark suit, holding a folded program in his left hand. He's mourning. But what nobody in this chapel knows is that this is the reason there's a casket at the front of this church. He is attending his victim's funeral. However, in exactly 11 minutes, he's going to make a mistake that will destroy him.
Dispatcher, officer dispatch 2526. Here's 27 Mulvey Road, Catholic Chapel. Officer shot. Repeat, officer shot. Code 0.
The date is September 14th, 2019. The location is Riverside Community Chapel in Bakersfield, California. The service is for Marcus Wellington, 42 years old, who died 6 days earlier on September 8th. The official cause of death, listed on the certificate signed by the county medical examiner, reads acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack, sudden, tragic. But ultimately, from a medical standpoint, unremarkable. Marcus was overweight. He had high blood pressure. He worked in commercial real estate, a high-stress profession. He was a prime candidate for cardiac arrest. The case was closed before it ever really opened. But Marcus Wellington did not die of a heart attack. He was murdered, and his killer is sitting in this chapel right now, performing grief like it's an audition. To understand what actually happened to Marcus Wellington, you need to understand how the human heart kills you when it fails. A myocardial infarction occurs when blood flow to a section of the heart muscle is blocked, usually by a clot in the coronary arteries. The tissue starves for oxygen. Within minutes, that oxygen-deprived muscle begins to die. The heart's electrical system destabilizes. Ventricular fibrillation starts. The heart's lower chambers quiver uselessly instead of pumping blood. Without immediate intervention, brain death occurs within 4 to 6 minutes. The entire cascade, from the initial arterial blockage to biological death, is a brutal, inexorable process. The symptoms are distinctive: crushing chest pain, radiating down the left arm, shortness of breath, cold sweats, nausea, overwhelming dread. A victim of cardiac arrest knows something catastrophic is happening. They call for help. They reach for their phone. They don't just silently collapse and die while sitting alone at their kitchen table at 11:47 p.m. on a Sunday night, which is exactly what the initial police report claimed happened to Marcus. But the details of Marcus's death, the actual minute-by-minute timeline of his final hours, weren't scrutinized. Why would they be? The paramedics who responded pronounced him dead at the scene. The body was transported to the county morgue. A cursory autopsy was performed. Heart disease, case closed. Sharon was a widow. Their 2 teenage sons had lost their father, and the insurance company was preparing to pay out Marcus's $850,000 life insurance policy. Except Marcus Wellington had an enemy, someone who wanted him dead, someone who had spent 3 months meticulously planning his murder, someone who understood enough about human physiology to kill a man and make it look like natural causes. And that someone made the arrogant, narcissistic decision to attend the funeral, to stand among the mourners and watch the family grieve, to extract some twisted satisfaction from witnessing the aftermath of his crime. His name was Derek Faulkner. He was 39 years old. He was Marcus's former business partner. And exactly 8 months before Marcus died, Marcus had discovered that Derek had embezzled $1.4 million from their commercial real estate firm. Marcus Wellington and Derek Faulkner met in 2012 at a real estate investment seminar in San Diego. Marcus was 35, ambitious, working for a corporate property management company, but dreaming of starting his own firm. Derek was 32, charismatic, with an MBA from USC and what appeared to be an impeccable track record in commercial acquisitions. They bonded over shared frustrations with corporate bureaucracy. Within 6 months, they'd formed Wellington Faulkner Properties, LLC. Marcus brought the capital, a $380,000 inheritance from his late father. Derek brought the expertise, or so he claimed. For the first 5 years, the partnership thrived. They specialized in mid-sized commercial properties, strip malls, office parks, medical plazas, buying distressed assets, renovating them, and flipping them for profit. By 2017, the firm was managing a portfolio worth $12 million. Marcus handled client relations and property management. Derek managed the finances and acquisitions. It was a clear division of labor. Marcus trusted Derek completely. That trust was a fatal mistake. In January 2019, Marcus's accountant noticed an irregularity during a routine audit. A series of wire transfers totaling $43,000 had been made to a consulting firm called Apex Strategic Solutions. Marcus had never heard of Apex. He asked Derek about it. Derek's explanation was smooth, polished. Apex was a financial consulting group he'd hired to analyze potential acquisition targets. Completely routine. Marcus accepted the explanation, but something nagged at him. He started reviewing old bank statements. What Marcus discovered over the next 3 weeks was a systematic, sophisticated theft spanning nearly 2 years. Apex Strategic Solutions didn't exist, not as a legitimate consulting firm. It was a shell company Derek had created with a business address that turned out to be a UPS store mailbox in Fresno. The $43,000 was just the most recent transfer. There had been dozens of others. Fake invoices for property maintenance, inflated contractor fees, payments to non-existent vendors. Derek had been siphoning money from the partnership since early 2017. The total theft, $1.4 million. Marcus confronted Derek on February 18, 2019, in their office conference room. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Marcus had printed documentation, bank records, wire transfer receipts, incorporation papers for the shell companies. The evidence was irrefutable. Marcus gave Derek 2 options: repay the money immediately and dissolve the partnership, or face criminal prosecution. Derek chose neither. Instead, he began planning murder. But here's what made Derek's plan so insidious, so difficult to detect. He didn't use a gun, a knife, poison, or violence. He used Marcus's own body against him. He weaponized Marcus's pre-existing health conditions to create a death that would be immediately accepted as natural. And the method he chose required intimate access to Marcus's daily routine, his home, his food, his medication. Derek knew Marcus took medication for high blood pressure, specifically a prescription beta blocker called metoprolol. Marcus took one 50-milligram tablet every morning with breakfast. Beta blockers work by blocking the effects of adrenaline on the heart, slowing the heart rate and reducing blood pressure. They're incredibly common, prescribed to millions of Americans. They're also safe when taken as directed. But like any medication that affects cardiac function, they become dangerous when combined with certain substances or when the dosage is dramatically increased. Here's what Derek understood that most people don't. You can induce cardiac arrest through metabolic disruption. The heart relies on a precise balance of electrolytes, sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, to maintain its electrical rhythm. Disrupt that balance severely enough and the heart's conduction system fails. Ventricular fibrillation occurs. The victim dies. And because the heart's electrical system leaves no trace once it stops, an autopsy will show only the end result: cardiac arrest. The underlying cause, the electrolyte imbalance that triggered the fatal arrhythmia, disappears within hours as the body's chemistry changes after death. Derek's murder weapon was potassium chloride. It's a mineral supplement available over the counter at any pharmacy. In proper doses, it's harmless, even beneficial. In large doses, administered rapidly, it's lethal. When injected intravenously in a hospital setting, potassium chloride is used in lethal injection executions. It stops the heart within minutes. But Derek couldn't inject Marcus. That would leave a needle mark, an obvious sign of foul play. Instead, Derek found a more subtle delivery method. Over the course of 3 months, from March through May 2019, Derek poisoned Marcus slowly, methodically. He did it during their weekly partnership meetings, which, despite the embezzlement confrontation, continued as they worked to dissolve the business. The meetings always took place in Derek's home office. Derek always offered Marcus coffee, and Derek always prepared that coffee in his kitchen, out of Marcus's sight, which gave him the opportunity to add a carefully measured dose of potassium chloride powder to Marcus's cup. Not enough to cause immediate symptoms, just enough to gradually elevate Marcus's serum potassium levels, stressing his cardiovascular system, creating the conditions for eventual cardiac failure. But the potassium chloride was only part 1 of Derek's plan. Part 2 was even more diabolical. Derek was also stealing Marcus's beta blocker medication and replacing it with a different drug, calcium channel blockers. From the outside, the pills looked identical, but their effects on the heart, especially when combined with elevated potassium, were catastrophic. While beta blockers slow the heart rate, calcium channel blockers, in excessive doses, can cause severe hypotension and cardiac arrest. Derek was creating a pharmacological time bomb inside Marcus's body. The substitution was easy. Derek and Marcus had been close friends for 7 years. Derek had been to Marcus's house hundreds of times. He knew where Marcus kept his medications, in the master bathroom medicine cabinet. During a dinner party at the Wellingtons' home in July 2019, Derek excused himself to use the restroom. He went upstairs to the master bathroom, emptied Marcus's metoprolol bottle, and refilled it with calcium channel blocker pills he'd purchased online from an overseas pharmacy. The swap took 90 seconds. By late August 2019, Marcus was experiencing symptoms: fatigue, dizziness, occasional chest discomfort. He attributed it to stress. The partnership dissolution was dragging on, and the legal battle over the embezzled funds was intensifying. Marcus mentioned the symptoms to his wife, but insisted he didn't need to see a doctor. It was just stress. It would pass. This was exactly what Derek was counting on. On September 8, 2019, Derek executed the final phase. He invited Marcus to his house for one last meeting to finalize the partnership paperwork. It was a Sunday evening. Sharon Wellington was out of town visiting her sister in Phoenix. Marcus arrived at Derek's house at 7:30 p.m. They sat in Derek's home office for 90 minutes, reviewing documents. Derek offered Marcus coffee. Marcus accepted. This time, Derek added a massive dose of potassium chloride to the cup, 3 grams dissolved in the hot liquid. When combined with the calcium channel blockers Marcus had been taking for weeks and the already elevated potassium in his system from months of gradual poisoning, this final dose would trigger fatal cardiac arrhythmia within 3 to 4 hours. Marcus left Derek's house at 9:15 p.m. He drove home. He went to his kitchen. He opened his laptop to finish some work, and at approximately 11:47 p.m., his heart stopped. The electrical signals that had kept him alive for 42 years simply ceased. He slumped forward onto his kitchen table. He died alone in silence, never knowing that his former friend and partner had murdered him. Sharon found him the next morning. The paramedics arrived. The police were called, but only as a formality. There was no sign of trauma, no indication of foul play. The body was transported. The autopsy revealed severe coronary artery disease and an enlarged heart. The medical examiner concluded that Marcus had suffered an acute myocardial infarction. Natural causes. The death certificate was signed. The case was closed. Derek Faulkner had committed the perfect murder, or so he believed, because what Derek didn't anticipate, what he couldn't have anticipated, was that his own psychology would betray him. Derek had a narcissistic personality. He craved validation. He needed to witness the impact of his actions. And so, when Marcus's funeral was scheduled for September 14th, Derek made the decision to attend. He told himself it would appear suspicious if he didn't show up. After all, he and Marcus had been business partners for 7 years. His absence would raise questions, but the truth was simpler and more damning. Derek wanted to be there. He wanted to see Sharon's grief. He wanted to watch Marcus's sons cry. He wanted to feel the power of having orchestrated this entire tragedy. He's sitting in the third row now, dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. The pastor, Reverend Michael Chen, is delivering the eulogy. He's speaking about Marcus's generosity, his devotion to his family, his integrity in business. The irony is excruciating. And then Reverend Chen does something unexpected. He deviates from the prepared remarks. He looks out at the assembled mourners and says, "I know many of you are struggling with the suddenness of Marcus's passing. His death feels wrong. It feels incomplete. And I want you to know that if you have questions, if something about this tragedy troubles you, you should voice those concerns. Truth matters, even in grief, especially in grief." It's a strange moment. A ripple of discomfort moves through the chapel. Sharon Wellington looks up at the pastor, confused. But Reverend Chen isn't finished. He continues, "Marcus came to see me 2 weeks before he died. He was troubled. He told me he was afraid. He said he'd discovered a betrayal that had shaken him to his core. He said he was worried about his safety." The chapel goes silent. Derek Faulkner's heart rate spikes. His hands are trembling. He's staring at the pastor, his face draining of color. Reverend Chen says, "Marcus asked me to keep a letter. He said if anything happened to him, anything sudden or unexplained, I should give that letter to his wife and to the police. At the time, I thought his fears were exaggerated. I told him he was being paranoid. But now, standing here at his funeral, I believe Marcus was right to be afraid, and I'm going to honor his request." The pastor reaches into his jacket pocket and removes an envelope. Derek Faulkner stands up. The movement is abrupt, jarring. Every head in the chapel turns to look at him. He mumbles something about feeling ill. He pushes past the other mourners in his row and stumbles toward the exit. His face is pale. Sweat is beading on his forehead. He looks like he's about to collapse. And that's when Detective Sarah Campos, who has been standing at the back of the chapel, steps forward and blocks his path. Because Reverend Chen hadn't deviated from the script. He'd been working with the police, and the letter he's holding isn't from Marcus Wellington. It's a warrant for Derek Faulkner's arrest. Marcus Wellington had indeed visited Reverend Chen 2 weeks before his death, and he had told the pastor he was afraid. But Marcus hadn't left a letter. What Marcus had done was contact an attorney and a forensic accountant. He'd been building a criminal case against Derek. He'd documented the embezzlement meticulously, and he'd told 3 people, his attorney, his accountant, and Reverend Chen, that if anything happened to him, they should immediately alert the authorities and demand a thorough investigation. When Marcus died suddenly, his attorney, David Brennan, contacted the Bakersfield Police Department Homicide Division. He explained Marcus's fears. He provided the financial evidence of Derek's embezzlement. He argued that the death was too convenient, too perfectly timed. Detective Sarah Campos took the case. She reviewed the autopsy report. She interviewed Sharon Wellington, and she learned something crucial. Marcus had been experiencing unusual symptoms for weeks before his death, symptoms that weren't entirely consistent with standard cardiac disease progression. Detective Campos requested a more detailed toxicological analysis. The county medical examiner, Dr. Vanessa Ruiz, agreed to take a second look. This time, they tested for a broader range of substances, and they found it: abnormally high levels of potassium in the vitreous humor, the fluid in Marcus's eyeballs. Unlike blood, vitreous humor remains chemically stable for days after death. The potassium concentration in Marcus's vitreous fluid was more than twice the normal level. That was the first red flag. Dr. Ruiz also re-examined Marcus's heart tissue under a microscope. She found something the initial autopsy had missed: evidence of recent ischemic damage that wasn't consistent with a single acute heart attack. The pattern suggested repeated low-level cardiac stress over an extended period. Combined with the elevated potassium, it pointed to chronic poisoning, but proving Derek had administered the poison was another matter entirely. There was no direct evidence, no witnesses, no forensic traces. The coffee cups from Derek's house had been washed months ago. The medication switch would be impossible to prove. Marcus's beta blocker bottle had been emptied and discarded after his death. Detective Campos needed a confession, or at minimum, she needed Derek to reveal guilty knowledge. That's when Reverend Chen offered to help. He proposed the funeral plan. He would deliver the eulogy and at a specific moment, make the statement about Marcus's letter and his fears. If Derek was innocent, he would be confused but cooperative. If Derek was guilty, he would panic. His reaction would reveal him. And Derek's reaction was everything the detective needed. The moment he fled the chapel, he confirmed his guilt. Because an innocent man doesn't run from an accusation. An innocent man stays and demands to know what's in the letter. An innocent man fights the implication. Derek is arrested in the chapel parking lot. He's read his Miranda rights. He doesn't speak. He requests an attorney. He's transported to the Kern County Sheriff's Office and booked on suspicion of murder. His bail is set at $2 million. He cannot post it. He remains in custody. Over the next 6 weeks, Detective Campos builds the case. She obtains warrants for Derek's financial records, his phone records, his computer. She finds the online purchase of calcium channel blockers from an overseas pharmacy. She traces the shipment to a P.O. box Derek rented under a fake name. She interviews Derek's neighbors and learns that Marcus had visited Derek's house the night he died. She subpoenas the medical records and discovers that Derek had also purchased potassium chloride supplements online, far more than any person would need for legitimate health purposes. The evidence is circumstantial but overwhelming. The prosecution's theory is clear. Derek Faulkner, facing financial ruin and criminal prosecution for embezzlement, decided to murder his business partner. He used his knowledge of Marcus's health conditions and medications to create a death that would appear natural. He systematically poisoned Marcus over several months, then administered a lethal dose on the night of September 8th. And then, in an act of breathtaking arrogance, he attended the victim's funeral. Derek's trial begins on March 3, 2020. The prosecution presents 63 witnesses over 4 weeks. Sharon Wellington testifies about Marcus's declining health in the months before his death. Dr. Vanessa Ruiz explains the toxicological evidence and the mechanism of potassium-induced cardiac arrest. The forensic accountant details Derek's embezzlement scheme and his financial motive. Detective Campos walks the jury through the investigation timeline. The defense argues that the evidence is purely circumstantial. They claim Marcus's elevated potassium could have been the result of natural kidney dysfunction, a common issue in people with heart disease. They suggest Marcus's symptoms were caused by stress and pre-existing conditions, not poison. They point out that there are no fingerprints, no DNA, no direct proof that Derek ever administered any substance to Marcus. The case, they argue, is built on suspicion and coincidence, not concrete evidence, but the prosecution has one more piece of evidence. During the search of Derek's home, investigators found his laptop. On that laptop, buried in the browser history, were searches conducted between February and September 2019. The searches included undetectable heart attack, potassium chloride overdose, how to cause cardiac arrest, calcium channel blocker toxicity, do autopsies detect potassium poisoning, and statute of limitations embezzlement, California. Those searches are Derek's undoing. The defense tries to argue that the searches were taken out of context, that Derek had been researching medical issues for his own health. But the timeline is too precise. The searches begin immediately after Marcus confronted him about the embezzlement. They escalate in specificity over the following months, and they stop on September 9th, the day after Marcus died. The jury deliberates for 18 hours over 3 days. On March 31, 2020, they return a verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances, murder by poisoning, murder for financial gain. Derek Faulkner is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He's 40 years old. He will die in custody. But the story doesn't end with the conviction. Because Derek's crime set off a cascade of consequences that extended far beyond his own life, Sharon Wellington filed a civil lawsuit against Derek for wrongful death. The lawsuit sought the return of the $1.4 million Derek had embezzled, plus additional damages for Sharon's loss of consortium and her son's loss of parental guidance. In December 2020, a civil jury awarded Sharon $4.7 million. Derek had no assets. He'd spent the embezzled money on gambling debts and luxury purchases. Sharon will never see a dollar of that judgment, but she didn't file the suit for the money. She filed it to ensure Derek's crime was formally acknowledged in every legal form available. Marcus's two sons, Brandon and Kyle, were 16 and 14 when their father was murdered. Both boys struggled profoundly in the aftermath. Brandon developed severe anxiety and depression. He required intensive therapy and was briefly hospitalized for suicidal ideation. Kyle became withdrawn and his grades collapsed. Sharon later said that Derek didn't just murder Marcus, he murdered the future her sons had been building with their father. Brandon had planned to attend USC, his father's alma mater, and study business. He ended up taking 2 years off before college, working through trauma with a therapist. Kyle, who had been an honors student, barely graduated high school. The case also exposed systemic failures in the investigation of sudden cardiac deaths. Marcus's initial autopsy had been cursory. A visual examination and basic toxicology screening. The elevated potassium had been noted but dismissed as a postmortem artifact. It was only when Detective Campos pushed for a more thorough analysis that the truth emerged. In response to the case, the Kern County Medical Examiner's Office revised its protocols for investigating unexpected deaths in middle-aged adults. The new protocol requires extended toxicology panels and vitreous humor testing in all cases where foul play is even remotely suspected. Reverend Michael Chen's role in the case became controversial within his own congregation. Some members felt he had turned Marcus's funeral into a police operation, that he had exploited a sacred ritual to catch a criminal. Others argued that his actions had brought justice for Marcus and closure for Sharon. The debate split the church. Reverend Chen ultimately left Riverside Community Chapel in 2021 and took a position at a church in Oregon. In interviews, he said he has no regrets. "Marcus trusted me with his fears," Chen told a reporter from the Los Angeles Times. "When he died, I had a choice. I could treat that trust as a confidence that died with him, or I could honor it by seeking the truth. I chose truth. I'd make the same choice again." Derek Faulkner has never confessed. In the 8 years since his conviction, he has maintained his innocence. He filed multiple appeals, all of which were denied. His argument remains consistent. The evidence against him is circumstantial, the toxicology findings are inconclusive, and his internet searches were misinterpreted. In a jailhouse interview conducted in 2022, Derek said, "Marcus was my friend. I didn't kill him. He had a heart attack. That's what the first autopsy said. Everything that happened after that was a rush to judgment by police who needed someone to blame. But the forensic evidence tells a different story." In 2023, a team of cardiologists and toxicologists from Stanford Medical School reviewed the Marcus Wellington case as part of a research project on undetected poisoning deaths. Their analysis, published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, concluded that Marcus's death bore all the hallmarks of deliberate potassium-induced cardiac arrest. The pattern of his symptoms, the elevated potassium in his vitreous humor, the evidence of chronic cardiac stress, and the timing of his death all pointed to homicide. The researchers estimated that there are likely dozens of similar cases each year, murders disguised as heart attacks, that go undetected because the initial investigation stops at the first plausible natural explanation. Sharon Wellington has become an advocate for more rigorous death investigations. She's testified before the California State Legislature in support of legislation that would mandate extended toxicology screening in all sudden deaths of adults under 65. The bill, which Sharon has named Marcus's Law, is currently pending in committee. Sharon has also established a foundation that provides financial assistance to families seeking private autopsies when they suspect a loved one's death was misclassified. In 2024, Sharon remarried. Her new husband is a grief counselor she met during her advocacy work. She says Marcus would want her to be happy, to rebuild her life, but she also says she thinks about the murder every single day. "People ask me if I have closure," Sharon said in a podcast interview last year. "Closure isn't real. Derek is in prison for the rest of his life, and that's justice. But Marcus is still dead. My son still grew up without a father. We still live with the knowledge that someone we trusted, someone we invited into our home, was planning to kill us. You don't get closure from that. You just learn to carry it. Brandon Wellington is now 24. He eventually attended college, not USC, but a smaller state school closer to home where he could remain near his mother and brother during his recovery. He graduated in 2023 with a degree in psychology. He's currently working as a counselor at a youth crisis center, helping teenagers who've experienced trauma. He said publicly that his father's death and the years of therapy that followed showed him the importance of mental health support. He's turned his pain into purpose. Kyle Wellington is 22. He joined the Marine Corps after high school, seeking structure and discipline to channel his anger. He served for 4 years and was honorably discharged in 2024. He's now using his GI Bill benefits to attend community college, studying criminal justice. He's told family members that he wants to become a homicide detective. He wants to investigate the cases that everyone else dismisses as natural deaths. He wants to find the Derek Faulkners of the world before they get away with murder. The man who attended his victim's funeral, who sat in the third row, shedding false tears, performing grief for an audience while the man he'd murdered lay in a casket 30 feet away, is serving his life sentence at Corcoran State Prison in California. He's in protective custody, segregated from the general population because other inmates view him as a particular kind of coward. Even among convicted killers, there's a hierarchy of contempt, and those who kill through deception, who murder with poison rather than violence, are considered the lowest form of criminal. Derek Faulkner will never leave prison. He's filed his final appeal. It was denied in November 2023. He's 44 years old now. If he lives to the average life expectancy for an American male, he has roughly 33 years left. 33 years in an 8x10 cell. 33 years of counting the minutes, the hours, the decades. 33 years of knowing that a single decision, the decision to attend Marcus Wellington's funeral, to witness the grief he'd orchestrated, cost him everything. Because if Derek had stayed home that day, if he'd sent flowers and a condolence card and kept his distance, there's a real possibility he would have escaped justice. The initial autopsy had ruled the death natural. The case was closed. Without Marcus's attorney pushing for investigation, without Reverend Chen agreeing to the funeral plan, without Derek's panicked flight from the chapel revealing his guilt, the truth might never have emerged. Derek Faulkner might have gotten away with murder. Instead, his narcissism, his need to be present at the scene of his triumph, delivered him into custody. The pastor didn't expose him with evidence. The pastor exposed him with theater. And Derek, unable to control his fear, unable to perform innocence when directly confronted, confessed his guilt through his actions long before any jury pronounced a verdict. That's the terrible irony at the heart of this case. Derek Faulkner was intelligent enough to commit a nearly perfect murder. He understood pharmacology, physiology, and the limitations of standard forensic investigation. He planned for months. He executed his crime with precision. But he wasn't intelligent enough to understand his own psychological weaknesses. He needed validation. He needed to see his work. And that need, that fundamental flaw in his character, is what destroyed him. Justice, in this case, came from an unexpected place. Not from forensic evidence alone, though that was crucial. Not from detective work alone, though Detective Campos's persistence was essential. Justice came from a pastor who agreed to turn a funeral into a trap, from a grieving widow who refused to accept easy answers, from an attorney who listened when his client expressed fear, and from a killer who couldn't resist the temptation to attend his victim's funeral. Marcus Wellington was murdered in his own kitchen by someone he'd considered a friend. His death was disguised as natural causes. His killer attended his funeral and wept false tears over his casket. But Marcus's voice didn't die with him. He told people he was afraid. He documented his concerns. And when he died, those people refused to let his death be dismissed as merely unfortunate. That's the lesson of this case. The killer who attended his victim's funeral believed he was untouchable, believed his crime was perfect. But perfect murders don't exist. They only exist until someone asks the right questions, until someone refuses to accept the convenient explanation, until someone looks closely enough to see the truth. And when that truth emerges, when the mask slips and the killer is finally exposed, justice, slow, imperfect, but inexorable, finds its way home.